And did I see, Paul, did you have a? So we'll move along now back to
Thank you.
Kathleen Burchett from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, who I believe has been here before, and
Actually, but not in person.
not in person, okay. The purpose of this item is to present members with an update of the progress of the proposed U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service conservation area in this region. This connects to our CCMP through action number 2 under Fish, Wildlife, and Habitat Protection Priority, which is to encourage and support the permanent conservation of environmentally sensitive lands and critical habitat areas through land acquisition and conservation assessments held in perpetuity for habitat resilience and migration. And this is an action item, so we'll come back at the end of after the presentation and see if there's a recommendation to be had towards our policy conference.
First, thank you. And thank you, Jason, also for swapping, because I know that kind of is tough when you got a plan. I came over from Vero Beach, so I hit traffic and school and rain, and I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. I was shocked by the time I made up. I won't explain how I made up, but I still kind of showed up. And so this gave me a few minutes to digest and get off that, like, you know, clenched finger on the steering wheel. And also, I continue to get amazed of the overlap of great conservation. And it tells me that we're working in the right places. And we all hear the same information about what we need to be doing and where we need to be doing it. So, and thank you, Jennifer, for inviting me and also being such a strong advocate of the process that we've been through, and not just saying it, but showing up and doing it. We received a great letter from the organization, which was really helpful in why we worked on our project. But what I'm going to do today is I'm just going to take a few minutes to explain how we got to where we are today, and maybe I'll give you a little bit of information about what we kind of heard in the comment period. The comment period has ended, but we haven't finalized our plan, but I'll share a little bit about what we kind of heard. So starting off again, Kathleen Burchett. I am what's called a refuge supervisor, which is a really sad term because it means I used to be a refuge manager and do all this great stuff on the land, and now I'm an administrator. So I'm officially I've been in the Fish and Wildlife Service for 32 years, all of which was in refuges, which is unique kind of, but I'm happy with that. I'm a blue goose person, which is our symbol for refuges. But you can't be successful if you work in a silo. So I work with ES, Ecological Services, Science Application, our MyBirds, our law enforcement programs, and other programs to make sure we are really super successful. But I've also worked all across the country. So I too am not a generational Florida. I've been here for 8 years, love every minute of it. But I've been all over. I've been to Montana, Iowa, Mississippi, along the Mississippi River, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Illinois. I don't know. We move a lot. Mingo in Missouri. It used to be very much encouraged for us to move. The sad part about that, which you probably all know because you know the key to success, is relationships and partnerships. It's hard to make partnerships when you show up for 2 to 4 years and you're on the road again, right? It's too much of a revolving door. So what's been really nice is lately that attitude has changed. And that's a good thing because I think projects like this would be a lot harder to pull off. So I've been here 8 years now. And like I said, I've really enjoyed every minute of it. So how I'm here today to talk about the proposed Everglades to Golf Conservation Area. This is actually the name. We used to start off saying Southwest Florida Conservation Area, but we received some feedback and people had some ideas and we embraced them and we love the name. If you go to the next slide, it'll show you before we do any planning process, we have to do something called a landscape conservation design. So that's what the LCD stands for. And an LCD is hard science. You have to investigate, is there information, is there good habitat and wildlife to work in this area? Also, what does the community think about working in this area? Are you embraced? Are you not embraced? Do they need help? Do they not need help? And then also, what are the threats? So we commissioned an LCD, the Landscape Conservation Design, from Julie Morris with the Florida Conservation Group, National Wildlife Refuge Association, and also Dr. Tom Hucker from the University of Florida, which was mentioned. They helped us with the science because I don't know if you know about this, but in Florida, you guys have the best science. Other parts of the country use you as example, use that work as this is the amazing stuff, and we took advantage of it, and we didn't want to reinvent the wheel because there's already some great stuff. So what you do also is you look at the greatest extent possible. We were able to do this because the current administration has America the Beautiful initiative. It's called the 30 by 30, protect 30% of our land by 2030. It's part of the administration. And they said, where do you want to work? Well, many of you might say, this looks familiar. It reminds me of the Fishing Creek, Florida Panther Refuge expansion. And it also looks like another project we were working on up by north of the Caloosahatchee. Well, we said this is the second time in my 30 years we've been asked, where do you want to add refuges or conservation areas? So I'm like, we're going big or we're going home because this happens, twice in 30 years. So let's do it. So we were very ambitious and we looked at a 7 million acre area. Okay. And we examined it on ecological priorities, and like all those other threats, community engagement, those kind of things. It includes the greater Everglades. That's where we get the Everglades to go. And what I mean by that is Fishing Creek, Caloosahatchee, anything south of the Caloosahatchee has huge influence in Everglades restoration, which I also am engaged with on part of my position. And also, Peace River and Mayaca Rivers, really affects Gulf, right? So that's kind of the Everglades to Gulf, and those are the areas we really focused on. So moving on to the next slide. So we took, after the LCD, we went out to the public and said, what do you think about this concept and idea? We got over 2,600 comments. We had 4 in-person meetings scattered up and down that area. We had 2 virtuals. One of them was an internal government meeting, and we really heard a lot. And we also heard that partnerships were really super important to it. And what we did as part of that, next slide, is we created a planning team. It's required, but for the first time ever in the whole service, which is kind of neat, we included the Miccosukee and the Seminoles. And now they always, by law, were supposed to be part of it, but we've never done a really great job at that. I'm just admitting. And all my work with Everglades restoration, I'm like, if we want to be successful here, there's a lot of overlap. We need to get a diversity of views and ideas. And so we had a very diverse group. We had FWC, we had DEP, we had DOT. That was engaged in this as well. We had Dr. Hucker and also Julie Morris, also giving the perspective of on the lands and what's happening we met weekly. A lot of work went into that, but we used that scoping information. Sorry, I just hit the wrong button to figure out what we were going to do and how we're going to do it. So next slide. So together we did, we created a draft land protection plan and environmental assessment. And I know you heard about it. It talks about goals, vision, mission, what kind of acquisition boundary. We had to create something out of the 7 million acres. What are some alternatives? How can you protect lands? We talked everything about payment for ecosystem services. We talked about fee title purchase. We talked about easement. So there was a lot of potential ways to go about that. And we also had to analyze impact as part of NEPA. So we did all the typical NEPA evaluation. And we also did a conceptual management plan. If you did do something, and if you did acquire fee title lands, how are you going to manage it? Well, we knew for sure things like fire are really important, wildlife dependent use, those kind of things. Like, how are we going to manage this area? So next slide. So these are the 4 overarching goals of the new conservation area: protection, restoration, and manage habitats and wildlife. That's what we're in the business for. You know, that's what we traditionally do. That's what we're really good at doing. But then there's also science-driven landscape level conservation. We know that that's amazing around in Florida, and this project does a really good job at that, using the data that we have available to know where to work. And then how does it benefit people? The Fish and Wildlife Service, we used to gather lands, put up gates, put up signs. We wouldn't let anyone out there, not Audubon, not researchers, nobody, stay away, stay away. And we realized not a successful model. For long-term sustainability, I have a hint, it's not a good one. So, you know, everyone knows about the Park Service. Very few people tend to know about the U.S. Fish and Wildlife. Part of that is because we did that. We gated people off. We said, this is ours, this is for us. Well, we learned that we have to be more, we have to tell people why they're perking. It's your tax dollars. It's every one of ours. We need to say why it is. Now, there's times endangered species, maybe resting waterfowl or like rookeries of kites or other things. There's times where you tell people nobody can come in here. But when you can invite the public, you should be invited because it's all of our now. So we've gone a long way with that. And there's a little bent here in this project, which is also the native people, the native, you know, nations. How do we engage with them as well? And that was sort of a focus of this project, along with being adaptable and flexible. That's the easement perspective. That's the payment for ecosystem services and other things like that, like getting engaged with alternative forms of conservation. So the next slide, I'm just going to dig in a little bit on the so you have a vision, you have goals, and you can do some objectives. So again, restoration of the Everglades, it helps what? It says over 70 threatened and endangered species. After we did a little more digging and looked at insects and plants, it's over 100 state and federal species in this area. It's pretty impressive. That's really cool stuff. Coastal estuaries, ecological integrity, water supply, recreation and the economy. Wow. Really? Like this is wonderful stuff. Links it back to the people perspective. How can we help out with these things? Next slide. Unique spots. Saw my first ghost orchid when I got to Florida at Florida Panther, and it really turns you up inside. There's some amazing places out here that are nowhere else in the entire nation and the world, and we need to conserve that complexity and diversity for resiliency. And I usually have a longer time because I know you guys know about things like this, how important resiliency and diversity is for the protection of habitat. So next slide. And then the rural lands, keeping working lands working, right? That's economically viable for all of us. It's good for wildlife. If it wasn't for the wise stewardship of generations of ranchers, we wouldn't have this to protect. I mean, we owe it to keep this going. Adaptation to climate change, both going coastally inward. We know Hurricane Ian really taught people, let's move inland. Well, you know, sea levels coming in and the critters need some kind of relief. They need these transition zones. So we did work on that. And Dr. Hocker put together a retreating model that is worked into our ecological priorities to help us understand how could species move inland in order to adapt to climate change modifications. And then we want to complement the amazing, great stuff other folks like you and the agencies represented and what they're doing, because we can't do it alone. There's no way we can't do it alone. So we definitely want to complement the great work others are doing. So the next slide talks a little more about the people. This is the first time that an objective was presented that includes providing cultural, traditional, and medicinal usage for native, the tribal nations. And this is fee title type thing. So if we require fee, we can't tell private landowners with easements how to manage their land or who to let on it. That's entirely up to the private landowner. But when we acquire fee title, we want to make sure we're welcoming and provide opportunities as needed. And of course, our traditional recreational wildlife dependent uses as well, they have to be appropriate and they have to be compatible. So if you pass those tests, we're there. And we're modeled we want to model this after Everglades Headwaters Conservation Area, which has been extremely successful because the lands have been part of the WMA, the Wildlife Management Area System. Hunters and fishermen and other user groups, birders, others, we really like that opportunity, and it helps with consistent messaging. Being a hunter, nothing is more frustrating than you go on different lands and you have to use different rules and it's all confusing and you don't know if you're doing it right. Well, this helps with some of that consistency by being part of the WMA system as well. So the map. So this was our proposal. It's about 4 million acres out of that 7 million, 4 million. I think this is really cool stuff. One thing that came out is north, the very north piece for, includes a portion going over I-4. Because how do we help panthers and black bears and all 98 other species? How do they move around in this landscape if we need to think about that? So out of scoping, people said, you need to think about helping them get north of I-4. So that was an addition that came directly out of comments from scoping. And we heard more about it even with our draft plan. Make it even bigger is what people are suggesting. It's pretty interesting, very important, that's for sure. We're allowed to purchase fee title 10% of the conservation boundary. So it's about 4 million acres. That means about 400,000 acres of fee title potential purchase. The tribal nations asked to be excluded from consideration, but that doesn't mean they don't want to be ongoing partners. They just don't feel need for the federal government, doesn't this sound familiar, to take purchase some of their land, right? They're like, please don't, we've been through that before. And I'm like, absolutely, understand. We're not interested. We want to be partners. We want to work together, but we understand the need to, you know, exclude tribal land. So that's what some of those, you know, cutouts are. That's to be respect and honor that thought, their thoughts as well. This is kind of neat. This is sort of this strange little, hey, why do you have these weird shapes? That's from input from the folks about do more. Think about these coastal connections. And so we actually looked what's protected, what's not protected. If it wasn't protected, but it's still important, we added it in because we want to have the flexibility and the opportunity to adjust as needed. And wildlife linkage is always driving and home of why we want to do it and where we want to do it. And of course, we all know that the timing, distribution, and length of quantity and timing of releases of Lake Okeechobee are really important to Moosahatchee and also the St. Lucie estuary as well. And we feel that we, by, you know, we also have some thoughts and ideas with that and included the Moosahatchee Fishing Creek area as well, because all that stuff is really important in water quality, because water quality is definitely a theme in this project as well. If you protect the uplands, you don't have to clean up the bottom, right? We learn that over time too. If we can keep stuff clean going into Lake Okeechobee, we don't have to worry about it coming out. So, you know, always that thought of taking care of what's most important and water and species. So where are we going to work? Next slide. These were our ecological priorities. They're based off the CLIP database. They're based off the Florida Greenways Network, which you heard about. Also 12 different models. And I forget the exact number, I'm sorry. I think it was like 38 different species, individual species models from FNA that were also kind of worked into this and overlaid just to make sure we're not missing anything. And there's 3 levels of green: dark green, medium green, lime green, low green, all super important. All of it would be important. All of it would be a priority, and all things we would be interested in working. You can see that there's also about 3.3 million acres available in this landscape for potential acquisition that's either lime, medium, or dark green. And the next slide gives you a little bit of an acreage breakdown, where and the gray is protected lands, which is out of date probably today because more lands are constant, thank goodness. Florida forever, family lands are adding stuff every day. Amazing work. And so some of this is outdated, but you get an idea of how much is already protected. Also helps me see where we could do some linkages, where we could, like, you know, work adjacent to other areas to strengthen that footprint. that is what, we came up with, out of that landscape of where to work. So it kind of breaks it down a little further for you. Next slide. Ugh, I hate talking about this slide, it makes me sad. But then I get really excited because there's so much good work we could do. Threats and 2070, this is based off the 2070 trend data. More than 1,000 people a day. That's a big joke. People, 1,000 people a day, Miami a year. And I'm like, yes, that's me. I thought I kind of try to pound home to everybody. That's amazing stuff. So we need to know where the urgency is. And of course, it's wherever you build a new road, wherever you make a road bigger, wherever, you know, we know these things, wherever you have an on-ramp to an interstate. Stay tuned, it's coming. We work with our partners, Ecological Services, when they get permit requests, that helps us know a little bit about what's important. And so, you know, but this is where the darker the red, the more urgent, more under threat it is. And let's talk a little bit about something, you know, we can do the development idea, but you know, there's something else going on too, and that is effects of climate change. Every time I think about this, it continues to shock me. The model simulations predict changes in seasonal precipitation for Southwest Florida, increases in the dry season rainfall up to 20%, and decreases in the wet season rainfall up to 30%. We're going to see some huge shifts. We're going to have to be able to manage, adapt, and have the buffer to absorb those things. We need to use fire, and we need to use restoration. And one of the other things that came out of scoping was don't discount lands that need to be restored. You know, we're like, oh, let's take the good stuff. You know, we want the best. We want everything in perfect condition. There may be times where we purchase stuff that needs to be completely restored hydrologically and vegetatively, because we know it's critical for those corridors. So that's going to be a little bit of a shift on the way generally the service does business as well. So planning timeline, next slide. This is the one I think is hilarious because the first time in my 30 careers we're actually on time. No changes have been made to this slide. We've actually and you see it's something in January. I'm here today. We have finalized our comments. We have written responses to comments. We have modified our final plan. And we are now in the process of presenting to the director for approval. All right, so we expect Martha Williams to present that to her honestly next week. I have a meeting and we'll see where we go with this. There's been a lot of effort into this. There are some changes. So I know folks have spent some time looking at the draft. I would encourage you also to look at the final. And the next slide, which will be posted at our webpage when it is finalized. It'll probably take time because although we presented to Ms. Williams, we also need to come back and, you know, redo cover pages, change the word should to will, and you know, all those fun things you do when you get things finalized. And but so give us like a month or so and we will be posting it. And I'm pretty excited, and I will share a little bit some of the things we heard. How does this specifically relate to our conservation efforts? And we would refer people to pages, and we'd also write a response to that. We heard I-4 make it bigger, and I'm listening because we need safe zones, we need those underpasses and other things for critters to move around. We heard about 2,989 positive comments and only one negative response.
Really?
Wow.
That's amazing.
Pretty amazing. So the people and the community, and that's all across the country. Now, we often get, you know, differences of opinions about things about hunting and things like that, which is totally like, you know, acceptable, but only one entity that's actually within the footprint was kind of like, hey, I don't know, this is not a well-embraced project, which I think is funny because 2,988 people, but we get it, like different people, but it is a willing seller only program. So if you don't want to participate, there's no pressure. You don't have to participate. This is all about if you want to be part of it, if you want to pass down this type of legacy for your future generations, you know. And we had over 90 organizations or people representing those organizations responding, which is really incredible.
Any last closing comment before we move to our recommended action?
Well, I just wanted to interject, as Kathy mentioned, the CHMP did submit both technical comments and a letter of support during the public commenting phase. We talked about how this proposed conservation area would provide large-scale economic benefits. Using our economic valuation study, we talked about supporting rural farming and ranching communities, supporting state conservation priorities, how this intersected with the Florida Wildlife Corridor. And we also talked about how it supports regional and local conservation priorities, including our own CHMP adopted habitat restoration needs plan, which was used. We actually supplied all that GIS work, and it was utilized in the draft conservation area plan and mapping efforts. So there's a lot of synergy here. We wanted to support it. It also protects water resources. And if you come to our climate summit in February, we actually have Dr. Josh Daskin coming to talk about his analysis of how the Florida Wildlife Corridor supports resiliency. So all these things definitely intersect, and we have been supportive, but we are looking today to get a recommendation from management.
So this is the recommended action, which is to recommend that the policy committee support approval of the final land protection plan, which is now in its last section before adoption. I take it before being finalized, the proposed development or proposed Everglades to Gulf Conservation Area, and this will go to the director of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Is there a motion to take that action? So moved. Second. Moved by Haley.
Bailey and then Harry.
Can I ask a question here real quick? Kenny, I think I heard you said that you tried to model this after the headwaters, the Everglades headwater plan. And so is there any significant differences between the two land management plans?
Yes, a little bit. So in the Everglades headwaters, it was new to Florida for the Fish and Wildlife Service to have a role like this. And there was a little bit of, we had a little concerns with credibility. And so at one point we had folks ask us to really highly designate where we might buy feed. That's very unusual. I've done some conservation areas in Montana. It was very difficult too. We have since had people outside that highly designated area say, I want to sell whole, and we can't accept it because we designated a subset of our original. We did not do that in this case. We want to have the flexibility to purchase fee title anywhere within that existing boundary. So that's probably the biggest difference, is that little nuance. And it's funny because you saw that area north of Lake Okeechobee, how it dog ears out like that. That's because those folks wanted to not be included in Everglades headwaters, and they've asked us to include them. And because of connectivity on a bigger scale for the state of Florida, we did make that adjustment to include north of Lake Okeechobee, because that's going to help all, with Lake Wales Ridge and movement in that area as well, and north of Lake Burchett. So that's the biggest thing. What have I learned? What have we learned, and how have we adapted? And bigger, you see how much bigger it is. It's like 2 Everglades.
Management activities and things. Are
yeah, they'll always be the same. We'll probably have a lot more fire, which is, exciting and absolutely necessary in this landscape. Just really important, prescribed fire. And we're really good at that. We have a huge team there.
A couple of questions. So the CHNEP provided the letter of support. This may seem kind of a basic question, but why is approval needed for this plan? Because this is a U.S. Fish and Wildlife plan.
But it was to develop the plan.
Yeah, so the motion is not that we are recommending. We're recommending to policy potentially to support the approval of it by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the final land protection plan. it's useful to the service to know that the local stakeholders are supportive in making their final decision on whether to continue forward with this and approving this final plan and implementing it.
But we did the CHNP has provided the letter of support.
We wrote a letter of support during the public commenting phase, which was actually before the final land protection plan. It was during the conceptual, what was the name? It had a conceptual plan. Yeah, so we wrote, that was what went out for public comment. And since then, after they received public comment, they finalized it into the final land protection plan, which is now what is going to the director. So we don't have another opportunity to, and that there's no public commenting opportunity per se on that. But again,